Have you ever found yourself saying, I'm such a hot mess? Okay, I say this all the time, and not in the it's late night, I'm at a bar in my early 20s kind of hot mess. Just like I feel like a hot mess in my life. Or maybe you just feel like you're different. Why can everyone else figure this out and I can't? There might be some things in this episode where a light bulb's going to go off in your brain and you're going to say, I've been doing this my entire life. Why am I different? And the answer is you are different because we're all different. And I want to remind you that there is nothing wrong with you. And I'm so glad that you are different and that you are uniquely you. And I pray that as you listen, you will start to reflect on where you can find the holy in all of your hot mess that is going on at home, at work, in the interior, just in life in general. As you continue to learn more about yourself through this podcast and how awesome and wonderful and beautiful you are, I just want to remind you that I'm so glad that God has gifted the people around you with the presence of you in all of your quirky and awesome and contagious ways. And I wish that there were more people like you in this world because you're incredible and God made you that way. So let's just take a moment and offer up a prayer of thanksgiving to the Lord for how amazing you are, how amazing your brain is, even if it's fighting you right now, how incredible it is that He is going to use your hot mess. And take a deep breath. Remind yourself of the truth that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, that you are unique and you have a unique mission. And that mission requires you to be just the way that you are. God made you perfectly for this exact time, for this cross that you are carrying, for this thing that is coming. And He has given you all of the tools that you need for today, all of the tools that you need for this moment. He is taking away your fears about not living up to other people's expectations, about not doing things perfectly. He is taking up your worries. So box up all of those negative untruths right now, lay them at the foot of the cross, and thank you for being you and being here with my incredible guest, Ginny. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to the Persistence in Prayer podcast hosted by Catholic mindset coach, wife, mother, educator, and speaker, Kylie Hein. Kylie is passionate about helping you deepen your relationship with God through the power of prayer. This podcast is a space for high achievers who want to do it all, but also want to prioritize their spiritual life and grow in faith. Join us as we explore the beauty of persistence in prayer and the transformative impact it can have on our lives. Get ready to discover practical tips, insights, and inspiration to help you develop a daily prayer practice and cultivate a deeper sense of trust in God's plan for your life. Let's journey together towards a more fulfilled and faithful life as we invite the Holy Spirit in. Let's begin. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, I am joined by Ginny Kochis. Ginny is the Catholic wife and mom to 3 twice exceptional children, a former high school English teacher, and adjunct professor. Ginny holds a master's in teaching, writing, and literature and has 2 decades of experience educating children of all ability levels. Through the not-so-formulaic website and community, Ginny offers practical support and prayerful encouragement to Catholic families with differently wired kids. Ginny believes that God gives curious, creative, intense children the exact mother that they need to thrive. And Ginny, I'm so grateful to have you here.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I think that so many women listening, whether they are neurodivergent or not, can relate to feeling different sometimes. And they have traits and characteristics that overlap with people who are neurodivergent, or they know someone who is. The first thing that comes to my mind really is the hyperfocus or perfectionism and anxiety.
Yeah.
And the last time I looked, there's research that says something like 50 to 75% of girls are undiagnosed with ADHD. And those girls grow up to be women like
Right.
those who are listening to this podcast, or the friend of someone who is listening, or the child of someone who's listening. And whilst many of them have found ways to cope, a lot of them are still figuring it out. So I'm just really excited for you to share your knowledge and your wisdom to everyone listening.
Sure. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about it. I am one of those girls who was undiagnosed and then became a woman with ADHD. So, yeah, no, I'm excited.
Can you just share for a minute in relation to the work that you do? I always like to start with something just a little different. So, what are some of the rewarding highlights that come as a result of the work that you've done?
Um, you know, it's so funny because I tend not to keep those at the forefront of my memory. Like I think I'm such a perfectionist that I tend to focus on all the things I could have done better or that I wish I'd done better. So there aren't any specific moments, but I it really does make me feel like God is moving when, I'll get an email from somebody who has used one of my resources at home or has read one of my books or listened to a podcast interview, that I was blathering on. They'll reach out and say, like, hey, I needed to hear what you had to say. I'm so grateful for what you said and for sharing your journey, all of that kind of thing. And I think, you know, I do struggle with pride a lot. So I think I've had to separate what is like a buildup of me versus what is glory to God, because everything that I do, really, all of that praise should go directly to God and not to me. So I guess this is a roundabout way of me saying, being able to say, Lord, you put me here and you asked me to do this. And now you're using me in that way to help other moms feel better about the lives that they're leading, to feel stronger in their motherhood, to connect with their kids. I think that is rewarding to me, to be able to say, God, you gave me this and now I'm giving it back to you. So I don't know. That was kind of a rambling answer, but I hope
What
it makes
I
sense.
Yeah, what I love about your answer though is it's so relatable. So many
Mm,
of us instantly go to the downfalls. I should have
hmm.
done better. I could have done more. I could have reacted to
Right.
this differently. And it is really difficult for us to celebrate the wins,
Hmm.
which are actually the thing that we need to keep propelling us forward, like to remind us of this is why this work is purposeful and meaningful. And so
Sure.
I think that's so true. I often will start coaching calls with, what's a way that you've seen God's grace this past week? And sometimes that's a difficult question for people to answer because they come
Hmm.
to a coaching call with all of the junk at the forefront of their mind, all of the
Right.
problems.
Hmm.
And that mental shift is something that we actually really have to practice.
Yeah.
And then relating it to pride, sometimes we think that pride is like, oh, I need to downplay all of the work that I'm doing, or
Sure.
we don't see that the pride can also come in thinking that we should have done it better instead of just praising God, just like you said, for how well it
Right.
actually went and
Right.
his work in it. So I actually loved your answer.
Oh, good. Thank you. I'm glad. Thanks.
Will you tell us just a little bit about the work that you do when you're talking about exceptional children, exceptional moms? What does
Sure.
that mean?
Okay. So, um, when I guess I'll just start with a little bit of history. When my oldest was in preschool, we started noticing a couple of differences between her and her peers. She was incredibly, incredibly intelligent, really artistically talented, but socially, she didn't have a lot of friends. She would have these meltdowns that were just astronomical. We would call them the DEFCON fives. And then there was even one, like, we call it the brownie incident. Like, that's how infamous it was. It was like a 45-minute long tantrum that ended with her finally just falling asleep because she just was exhausted from screaming for that long. And so when she went to kindergarten was kind of a disaster. She went in reading way above grade level, but she would run from the classroom. She would hide under the tables. She would argue with the teacher. So, make a long story short, we had her evaluated and she was identified as under the autism umbrella, specifically Asperger's, which they don't use anymore. That's no longer in the DSM-5, I think it is. So now, I mean, she would have been identified as level 1 autistic, not impacting language or intelligence. She is she's now 17. She just started her senior year of high school and she's like thriving. But at the time, I felt so just I don't know, there was feelings of devastation. There was feelings like I had done things wrong. I had untreated postpartum depression and really felt like I had done this to her in some way. So there was a lot of emotional upheaval. So after kindergarten, we pulled her out. I started to homeschool. We had two more kids, and each one of them ended up being also neurodivergent, but also intellectually gifted. So I had three twice exceptional children on my hands, and I was a mess. Like, I didn't know how I was going to manage these kids that I had because they were so incredibly curious and creative, but also so intense. Like my middle child, I couldn't take her outside when it was windy because she would go into hysterics. She was afraid that she was going to fly away from the wind. Turns out she has generalized anxiety disorder, OCD, and ADHD. you know, Same thing with my son, has the same diagnosis. So I felt very alone, I think, especially in our parish, because we had a lot of big Catholic homeschooling families with lots of really well behaved kids, and mine were not, and in fact, there was um, a woman in my parish, an older woman who like would kind of slide me old school parenting books, like advocating all kinds of like corporal punishment. And I was like, this is not cool, lady. And it just made me feel, I just felt awful. So I started writing. I was an English teacher. I'd always written as an outlet. And then I ended up founding my website. And from that, like this ministry. So now what I do, I started writing, I think, about this in like 2016, 2017. So for, I guess, the past 7 or 8 years, I have supported other Catholic moms raising neurodivergent children who are um, curious, creative, quirky, intense, and helping them learn more about their children's neurodivergence, help them understand that really, God doesn't make mistakes, that their children are exactly the way that He designed them to be, and just learning how to, I guess, help their families thrive. So whether it be through, I have a lot of products or resources for executive function, like how do you organize your head, your heart, and your home. Growth mindset is a huge one for me, helping kids work through perfectionism, anxiety, fear of failure in a Catholic way, like using the virtues, using the scriptures, the examples of the saints. I have a group coaching program that I do every 3 months where I just kind of walk side by side with these moms and help them with their marriages, with their sibling relationships, the kids' sibling relationships, managing emotional regulation, all of these things. So that's what I do in a nutshell. And then on the side is an outlet, like I write fiction. My fiction has neurodivergent characters, but like my main thrust is what I do with neurodivergent families. So
When you started having kids, had you been diagnosed at that point in time?
I I grew up, I was born in 1978. So I'm like a true 80s kid. I'm like late Gen X, early millennial. And so when I was in school, there wasn't a whole lot of that kind of diagnosis going on. There were a couple, the weird kids, quote unquote, I hate to say it, but that's the way it was viewed at the time,
Right.
um, who would go to like the learning center. But they were always kind of, I don't know, it sounds so catty, but they weren't viewed as smart or intelligent because they needed extra help. And so I had already developed this stigma of there is something wrong with me. Like I knew I was totally unorganized. Like I'm still friends with her. But my desk mate, we would sit in two little pairs of desks and she would organize my binders for me and my desk because it was just so bad. Like she would go through all my papers. I was big on procrastination. I would hyper focus on assignments and things that I really enjoyed and was excited about and do really well on those. But my first semester of high school, I think I had like a 2.4 GPA and I was supposed to be like gifted and really smart. And I was like, why is this happening? The only thing that I was ever diagnosed with was not sensory processing, an auditory processing disorder. And even that was just kind of like my pediatrician said to my mom, well, if she does better with written instructions, maybe she's got an auditory processing disorder. And that was it. It wasn't until later when I went to college and started having some issues emotionally that I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and the ADHD I've diagnosed myself after raising 2 ADHD kids. So,
Yeah. I just think it's fascinating because you sharing your story, and I think having worked in a school and then just looking at my peers from when I was in school, I'm 10 years younger than you, and some of them where they are now, especially in girls, the ones who were gifted or labeled as gifted early on, which
mm,
can create all kinds of its own interior anxiety just from having that
right.
label.
Yeah.
But if you were getting good grades, there was never any question or concern about if there was anything else going on.
Right.
The anxiety was often held in until you got home, and
Mhm.
then it would come out at home, and I saw this in my students too. Parents would tell me, like, "My kid is falling up to pieces at home," but I would
Mhm.
never see it in the classroom because as
Right.
girls, sometimes they just hold it in, they were quiet, they turned things in on time, they got everything done.
Yep.
But again, it was just that expectation that they were putting on themselves. So I
Mhm.
had a classmate, not a classmate, a peer in high school, valedictorian of her class, incredibly gifted, incredibly smart, diagnosed with autism. And
Mhm.
so it just makes me think how many of us are walking around with all of these things and we're like, what is wrong
Yeah.
with us? Just like you said, what is wrong with me?
Right.
And really nothing's wrong with us.
Mhm.
What's that mindset shift? You talk about growth mindset. What's that mindset shift that needs to happen to help us just recognize God just made us different?
That's a tough one. I think just going back a little bit, you were talking about how, they would hold it together at home and then fall apart, or hold it together at school and then fall apart at home. That's actually called masking. It's like a coping mechanism that a lot of neurodivergent people, especially women, will use. And it's part of it is that as women, we are more cued in, I think, to behavioral expectations and societal expectations. So we spend a lot of time observing the people around us, watching how they behave, and saying to ourselves, okay, that is what I have to do, even though every fiber of my being is screaming right now that I don't want to do that. So, like with my oldest daughter, she has days and sometimes even weeks where she just completely shuts down. And she's having kind of like an autistic meltdown. That's not the word for it. I forget what it's called, but she does shut down and she just needs to be like separated from the world for a while just to be herself. And I think it's hard at times because there was a while where she would look at those moments like they were a deficit. Like I am broken because everybody else can handle this high pressure. Everybody else can smile and speak to people and follow regular conversation without a problem. And here I am having to do it like it's my extra job. And then I go home and I fall apart. It took a long time for me to work her through, I guess, what you called it, a mindset shift. The idea that this is the way God made her brain, and these are it's just how she works. But fortunately, I mean, she has always been interested in nature and animals. So with her, it's been a thing of like animals just do what they do in the wild. Part of that is instinctive, but we have the added benefit of having reason in addition to our instinct. So I've helped her talk through how some of the things that her brain wants to do, it's instinctive, like stimming. One of her stems is like running or just like kind of jogging or skipping around. She needs that movement. And for a while, she was ashamed of it, but now she just skips down the hallway at school when she needs to. And I think it's a matter of there are some people who will say that it's a good idea to tell neurodivergent kids that the things that their brains do is a superpower. I don't know that I necessarily agree with that so much as I like to encourage them to realize that it's a unique part of who they are. And I focus on the psalm, I'm beautifully and wonderfully made. I'm butchering it right
Mhm.
now because, again, my brain is not thinking on the fly. But focusing on that and how that part of you is not a flaw. It is maybe something that you have to cope with, especially if it's an aspect of your life that doesn't fit within neurotypical society. But I also think it's good to find saints like St. Louis and Zaley Martin. St. Zaley Martin raised several neurodivergent girls. Saint Therese of Lisieux is one of her daughters. Saint Leonie, well, I'm not sure if I think she's blessed still. But, people, they assume now that she was autistic. So being able to see those holy people in that light, I think is also helpful. Again, another rambling answer. I apologize. It's my ADHD. I'm all over the place.
My brain works very much the same way, so I
Okay.
relate. I love that you brought up the saints that we can ask for help. I know you have a download on that too. I think it's
Oh, sure.
100 saints, something along those lines. So
Yeah.
saints that you can pray to, saints that you can ask when you're struggling to focus or when you just feel like you're different or your children are different.
Saint Thorlak is a good one. He's actually the patron saint of Iceland, I think, and people theorize that he was autistic. Saint Joseph de Cupertino, he would go into like these flights of like fancy. Well, I mean, they were trances, basically. They were holy trances, but he was also very quiet, very different. Who else?
I love him, by the way.
Yeah, he's really
There's a
cool.
there's a show Unformed if you want to go watch it.
Oh, there is? Yeah, I'll have
Yeah.
to look at.
Yeah.
I was just looking at this list this morning actually because I was thinking of doing something with it, and I can't remember Oh, Maximilian Kolbe, totally unorganized, but brilliant. He actually he didn't build, but he made plans for a prototype of a spaceship, like a rocket ship, which a lot of people don't know. And he also was editor of a newspaper. But if you look, there's one of my favorite pictures of him is him sitting at his desk, and it's a total disaster, like way worse than mine. So it makes me feel a lot better. But yeah, definitely the Martin family. One of my favorite Zélie Martin quotes is where she talks about Saint Therese having a tantrum and how the poor child acts like she's gonna die if she doesn't get what she wants. Really relatable. Or also there's one where she talks about um "If this continues this way, I will be dead by this evening, because it's just so much to bear." And I'm like, I totally get that. Saint Teresa of Avila, she was, man, a lot of girls on the spectrum are very, very inflexible. Well, okay, that's a negative way to put it. Very strong-willed. Okay, and Teresa of Avila was exceedingly strong-willed, and I think she tried to convince her brother actually to go off on the Crusades and kill some of the Moors. And they actually were heading out on the road to go do so when they got caught and turned around and brought back to the house. And they were like little, like 8 or 9. So, yeah, those are some of my go-to. Yeah.
They're amazing. Can you share with us a little bit? You talked earlier about walking through perfection, anxiety, and fear of failure. Do you have some key tips for someone who might be struggling with those things or have a child who's struggling with those things?
Yeah, it's all about replacing your interior dialogue or monologue and recreating those patterns, because what our brain does is we fall into we're creatures of habit as humans. And so we fall into these patterns of thought or these neural pathways that get established. So when you're looking at something new or something's not going the way that you want, your initial fallback neural pathway is to say, well, obviously, because it's too hard and I'm a failure. So it's a matter of retraining our brain to say, like, instead of I'm not good at this, I haven't mastered this yet. I'm still working on this. This is something I am still learning. And it's not a matter, one of the things that really bothers me, I think there's a huge difference between secular growth mindset and like a Catholic growth mindset. The Catholic growth mindset also brings in the idea of redemptive suffering, that the struggles and the things that we're going through, they all have a purpose. Like there's a reason why we are facing this challenge. It is going to bring us closer to God. It's going to bring us through stronger on the other side. It's going to change us and mold us in some way. So I think being able to recognize that anything that we go through that is hard has value, for our like spiritual lives, our salvation, but also for the people around us. Because when we persevere and we talk to our kids in a like realistic, in a realistic way, a relatable way about the things that we're facing, the struggles that we're facing, and how, yeah, we're scared, and how, no, it's not easy. But we know that this is something that we can learn and get better, that we can continue to try, that we can face these obstacles and turn them into stepping stones. I think that's huge for our kids, especially our daughters, to see that. But even our sons, who, a lot of boys who are neurodivergent really, really struggle deeply inside with those feelings of not being enough or not being worthy. And boys don't talk about it as much. So they just bury it. And so being able to see like your parents openly talk about those struggles and continue to overcome them, I think that's important for them.
Yeah. Growth mindset was a huge part of what transitioned me into the work that I'm doing because I just started
Mhm.
exploring it so much from a mathematical standpoint. I was a classroom teacher for middle school and high school math for a long time.
Mhm.
And I love that you brought in the difference between Catholic growth mindset and secular growth mindset, which is that redemptive suffering. And I don't know if you've read this book, but I've gone back to it recently just for some of my own suffering and health struggles. Dan Burke's Peace in the Storm, where he focuses on the writings of St. Alphonsus Liguori. And
Okay.
it's just such a beautiful perspective for anyone listening that just really takes us back to if we are here in this time, in this place, and whatever it is that we're going through, then we have to trust that that's God's will and that He is using that for something. There is a
Exactly.
purpose to it. And so when we can just not pray necessarily to be healthy or not that we can't ask for those things, but just pray instead for God's will. Like if the Lord wants
Exactly.
me to be sick in this moment because there's some sort of virtue that I'm growing in through this, then I'm going to praise him for that. And
Right.
that just takes away the pressure of the outcome of
Mhm.
wanting a specific outcome because we can just trust that the Lord's right here. He is near
Yep.
and everything is going to work out the way that he designed it to.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I've been praying the surrender novena a lot for that very reason. Just
Yes.
let it all go. So,
Such a good one. How
mhm.
has growth mindset helped you as a working mom? You have the added challenge, or I shouldn't say added challenge, different challenge of
Mhm.
your exceptional children, but
Mhm.
you are still running a business. You're still writing books. How do you
Yeah.
keep going? What helps you? To the woman who wears many hats, professional, mother, friend, yet feels like she is never enough. I see you. You've built a life of achievement, but at what cost? Your worth isn't defined by perfection, productivity, or praise. I want you to imagine a life where stress and overwhelm no longer control you, a life where your relationship with God and yourself can thrive. When you work with me, you'll find that hope and clarity you've been longing for. And together with the Holy Spirit, I'll guide you to a balanced life where family, work, and prayer coexist beautifully. Join me for a free confidence and clarity call today by clicking the link in the show notes. It's time to redefine success. It's time to let go of the stress and embrace the life God is calling you to live.
I don't know. That's a good question because I think my immediate gut response is one of those old neural pathways, which is that, I'm not like I'm I'm a hot mess. Mm. And just being able to recognize that, to be able to say that is my tendency, that I know I get that way, and to be able to sort the static from what is real. So like, I think about it in terms of the screw tape letters, having that voice in your head that is going to fill it full of doubt and anxiety and just like I used the word I used before, static, and being able to recognize, hey, those thoughts are not from God. Okay. Those thoughts are negative attitudes that are trying to scare me, trying to dissuade me from doing God's will. And then literally in my mind, imagining boxing them up, putting them at the foot of the cross, and then making a to-do list and going on with my day. Because I actually, what day is it? It's
Monday.
Monday.
Yeah.
Okay, Saturday. Saturday, I I just had been in a panic the night before. I think I was really tired. I woke up Saturday morning. My son was starting to get sick. He didn't sleep well. So then, of course, I didn't sleep well. Um, and so I was sitting on the front porch, just kind of like stewing, like completely lost. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had a to do list. I didn't want to do any of it because it all just felt too hard and there was just too much on it. And my mom texted and was like, "How are you doing?" And I was like, I am feeling pretty down, but I'm gonna fix my to-do list and I'm gonna stand up and I'm gonna go and do the things that need to be done. And that was something I actually learned from my therapist where she's a Catholic therapist. She was great. And she kind of helped me see just the value in chunking, like breaking things down into much smaller pieces. So when I was transitioning from homeschooling to putting the kids into school full time, that's around the time that I was seeing her. And I was just so overcome by like fear and anxiety that this was the wrong thing and that I wasn't serving my kids well by doing this. And she was like, all right, you know what? Let's just start with little tiny pieces. The first thing I want you to do is go visit the school's websites for the ones that you are, yeah. And so I did that. And then it got easier and easier. So that's one example, I guess.
Yeah. And it's so helpful too, because our brains, for a lot of us, is going a million miles a minute.
Mhm.
I posted something on Instagram a while back, and it was like all of the tabs I had open on my computer. And I had
Mhm.
so many people respond telling me, I have this, but I have 5 different browsers open with that many tabs. And then, like,
Yeah.
okay, this is totally normal. But when we're in that place, that chunking is so helpful, just writing it out and getting really specific. I
Mhm.
know I had a student once, and the only way he could get through a test was I would cut up his test. I would give him 2
Yeah.
questions at a time,
That's
and
awesome.
he was brilliant, but he just couldn't see 20 problems at one time. But if he saw 2 and then he got the next 2, he knew the next 2 were coming, but it just helped to simplify things, and I think this is such
Right.
a great strategy for all of us. Just
Mhm.
when you have your to-do list and it looks like too much, just look at 2 at a time or fold
Yeah.
it or whatever you need to do to help you get a starting point, because once you get one done, it's gonna be easier to go to the next thing.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So, a question I see asked a lot in social media circles from women is this idea that because they can't focus well, whether they have diagnosed ADHD or not, it's that they can't have meaningful prayer. Like, I can't sit in adoration because my mind is always going a million miles, or I sit down and I try to pray and then I think about this thing and I have to do it or I'm going to forget. What's your response to someone who struggles maybe with their prayer life?
This is another thing that actually came from my therapist, and she recommended. Um, I don't like to use the word mindfulness because I think when you say mindfulness, people get this whole like new age kind of
Yes.
connotation there, but it's more an idea of being present in the moment with what you're doing. So if you're folding laundry, then you can use that opportunity to say, "Lord, I am folding this laundry for my family. Thank you for the gift of my family." And taking that moment, even if it's just short and it's 30 seconds, that's a prayer. Or like the Mother Teresa quote where she talks about wash the dish, not because it's dirty, but because you love the person who's going to use it next. I think it's that same kind of thing. Like when you are doing a household chore, take that opportunity instead of grumbling about it. I mean, and I say this to myself, like instead of grumbling over the chores that I have to do that I hate doing, um, I need to turn that into an opportunity for prayer. Like, Lord, I hate cleaning the mold off of the shower, but I have a shower. Thank you. Like
Mhm.
turning it into an opportunity for gratitude. And then one of the things I do, I rely on apps and YouTube prayers a lot. So like Hallow, Lexio Divina, I do the 10-minute one when I walk in the morning. And then I'll use the Surrender Novena on YouTube and the Litany of Humility on YouTube also, which is a huge help to me. So like when I go after I get the kids off at school, I'll just take that 15-minute walk. And even when I was homeschooling, I would just say, "Kids, I am going for a walk. Do not kill each other. I'll be back in 15 minutes." And then they would come back and everything would be mostly fine. But it was important to me, I think, to get that. And then if I had something to listen to that was guiding me, even if and there's a point in the Hallow Lexio Divina where the narrator to the prayer says, like, if your mind begins to wander, just come back to today, the scripture from today. So it's like having that person, so to speak, with you. My mind does wander, but it's still there and I'm still listening and it'll pull me back. So,
Yeah. I can't think of what saint it is, but they talk too about, how much more beautiful is your prayer, how much more powerful when it's difficult for you to do versus if you just
yeah,
come and it's easy, it's difficult and you show up anyway. How
right.
beautiful is that? And how many graces is the Lord going to give you because you stayed and you struggled
Sure.
through it.
Yeah.
And I think just finding, like you said, your entry point for where you are right now. So whether that's utilizing an app or a video, or I
Hmm.
know for me, when I'm feeling really stressed or anxious, it is so hard to sit and pray. And
Yeah.
I know that that's what I need, but I just physically can't do it. So
Sure.
I will have to pray my rosary while I'm doing the dishes or while I'm
Yep.
doing laundry. And then
Hmm.
by the time I'm done, I can usually sit and pause and have a quiet minute, but I have to
Sure.
start somewhere else. So it truly is like that habit. And then
Hmm.
God's grace is going to give you the ability to sit longer if that's what he desires of you. So I
Sure.
think it's
Yeah.
just show up. You just keep showing up.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you have any suggestions when it comes to starting tasks or ending tasks? So I think that these are two different things. You talked about procrastination earlier.
Hmm.
And for some women, they can just jump into something really quick. But if they have a lot of ideas, maybe it's that procrastination, it's putting off or really needing a deadline. And then the flip side of that is that hyper focus once you start on it, being able to
Hmm.
turn it off when your family needs you and you have to go to something else.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of timers, actually, setting a timer for myself or even just giving myself a transition period. So, like, getting through, like, if I'm procrastinating, if I am sitting down, I love to read. So, if I'm like reading a book and I'm like, all right, just want to keep reading, I don't want to, I will say to myself, okay, because I have an e reader, I'll look and see, it tells me like how many X minutes I have left in that chapter. Like, I will finish this chapter and then I will get up and I will take a walk or go do a task where my mind can then sort of start to think about the things I need to do for the rest of the task I need to get started on. So I'm kind of gradually worming my way into it. Another thing that I have done, and then timers. Yeah. So like I'm going to sit down. If it's something that I'm really hyper focused on, I'm going to sit down and work on this for 30 minutes. And when the timer gets off or goes off, I am going to stand up and I'm going to walk and go check on the kids or do this chore or whatever. And you can set the timer for however long you need to. Another thing that I do sometimes is I will write down when I'm done with my work for the day, I will write down what I want to accomplish the next day, like on my whiteboard, so that if it feels overwhelming, and that was part of the problem I had on Saturday. Like I had a to-do list, but it was old and I hadn't gone through and kind of sorted through what I needed to do. So it felt overwhelming because there were the things on the list and there were the other things that I hadn't written down and I just felt so paralyzed. But if I take time, at the end of the day, like 5 minutes before I transition into family stuff or picking up the kids or whatever, and just write down, okay, tomorrow, this is what I'm doing, or these are the things that I need to accomplish, or at least get started. Then when I sit down to work the next day, I've got all of that, up for me right there, and I don't have to think about it.
How do you mentally handle it? Maybe this isn't an issue for you, but maybe you can recognize this with your kids when you aren't able to finish your list for the day. Is that ever a problem for you?
Um, yeah, and it's especially hard for my husband. Like he really struggles with that. And I think I don't know. My kids and I tend to be on the more like inattentive ADHD side of
Mhm.
things. So it doesn't really, I've gotten to the point, I think a couple of years ago, I probably would have said, well, that just proves that I'm an absolute failure. But I think I've gotten to the point now, I guess being on the shadier side of 40, like sort of on the way to 50. Just with age, I've been able to say, you know what? I can celebrate the things that I did get done and just be okay with that. And obviously, I mean, I can't just say to myself, be okay with this, and then I suddenly will be okay with it. But if I remind myself that, yes, there are things that I did accomplish, and some of the stuff is getting pushed off to tomorrow, some of the stuff is getting pushed off to tomorrow, and that is okay. I may not feel that it's okay, but it is because, I am not my work. I am the person that God created me to be. And God created me with these talents to be able to do this work, but that is not the whole of me. I am a mother, I'm a wife, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister. Like, there's way more to me than just this job that I've created for myself. Or, in the case of those who, are not entrepreneurs or have a job in an organization. Like, I am not this job that I earned and signed on to do. So I don't know if that helps.
Yeah. I think those are two great affirmations that everyone can take away. I am not my work, and there's more to
Yeah.
me than my to-do list. It really
Yeah.
goes back to that identity that you talked about with the way that our brains are wired, and just recognizing that that's our identity. That's the way that God has created us uniquely different
Mhm.
from everyone else in the world. And
Yeah.
our output, the product of that, is not what gives us our worth.
Exactly.
I think that's beautiful.
Thank you.
So before we close, I would love for you to tell everyone where they can find you, and then we'll jump into our prayer tip.
Sure. So you can find me. I'm on. This is such a mouthful, but it's not so formulaic.com. And I'm on Facebook under that same name and Instagram under that name. You can also find me at jennykochis.com if you're curious about my fiction at all. Um, yeah, that's where to find me.
And I have to say, Jenny, I started following your page, I don't know, years ago. I don't even know how
Oh,
I stumbled on it. And I don't know, my kids must have been really, really little. So I wasn't even related to having kids that were exceptional or anything like that. And I just always find it helpful. I love just reading your stories and the posts that you have.
oh,
And maybe
thanks.
that's because I have a lot of ADHD tendencies too that I
Yeah.
didn't realize, and they have come more to fruition after having children and as I'm aging. But I
Yeah.
just have found it so helpful. And I love that you always approach everything from such a Catholic lens
Oh,
and
thanks.
can show us that even when we think, I heard you say earlier that I'm such a mess, even when
Yeah.
we have those thoughts that our life is messy, there's so much that we offer the world even in that messy. And
Mhm.
on the other side of the screen, we don't always have it all together.
Right.
So we're walking through it with the people that we're journeying with. And so I think that's so beautiful.
Oh,
And
thanks.
I always close every episode with either a scripture verse or a prayer tip. And you kind of already shared your prayer tip, but will you talk about when you pray and kind of what that effect has on your day?
Yeah, I do it in the morning. like I, because that is when I am at That's when I'm at my sharpest. I'm definitely a morning person because by the time 3 o'clock rolls around, I don't, you know, I used to say like I have 11 billion things on my to-do list, and by 3 o'clock, all I want to do is eat potato chips. Like that's kind of how how I operate. So getting out in the morning and devoting time to prayer before I start everything else is really important to me. And back before when I was still homeschooling, I would get up. I still get up before they do and get like exercise time in, but I used to be a pretty consistent runner, and I would pray the rosary while I ran because I was up before them and it gave me something to occupy my mind with instead of just like racing while my legs were racing. But it's always been important to me to do in the morning before I get going because once I have that centered bit of time, then I find that my day flows much better. Um, I feel awkward starting my day without that morning prayer time.
Yeah,
So,
I can 100% relate. There are days when I do miss my morning prayer time because I wasn't feeling well or was up with a kid or something like that. But
okay.
the day has a very different tone from
Mhm.
when I've had that just quiet time with the Lord in the morning.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And Jenny talked earlier too, in case you missed it, about using the Hollow app for Lexio Divina. She said, I think you mentioned this one too, Catholic Connect's YouTube
Oh
version.
yeah, Catholic Connect has they have a litany of humility that I like to listen to. It's like 3 minutes, and then I love her because she she has the sweetest accent, but her YouTube channel is called Christelle. But she's a Filipino Catholic and she has all these prayers, like a ton of just recorded litanies or whatever you could want on her YouTube channel. And that's how I listen to the Surrender Novena. And that's about 2 minutes long. So like with Lexio Divina, it's like 10 minutes. Uh, Litany of Humility is 3 minutes. And then the Surrender Novena is usually about 2 minutes. So it's like a 15-minute walk. Um, yeah. So,
I love that. And I also love that so many apps now too they have the audio, but they also have the transcript that goes with it. So for me,
Yes.
I'm much more of a visual person. And I just love that on the Hollow app or even on YouTube, a lot of times you'll be able to find that so you can follow
Mhm.
along
Yeah,
visually if you need both, depending on your situation.
sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing that. It's been such a blessing to have you here. And I can't wait to get your book. You want to
Yes.
share about that quick?
Yeah, I have it's called Made for Greatness. It's a growth mindset for courageous Catholic youth. I have one for kids 8 to 12 and then one for kids like 12 and up. So yeah, it uses the scriptures, the virtues, the cardinal and theological virtues, stories of the saints, and first person stories from Catholic young adults who have faced and overcome challenges to help kids develop a growth mindset. So it combines those secular growth mindset principles with Catholic teaching, which I think is really the best of both worlds. Um, and so, yeah, I've been trying to send it to you, and it just it's been exercising growth mindset here, like because the mail just does not want to cooperate, but it will get to you. I promise.
Spiritual warfare. They don't want me to have it, but I can think of so
Yeah.
many people that I want to share it with once I do. So,
Yeah.
thank you again for being here. Thank you for your ministry and all of the work that you are continuing to do. Just saying yes to God.
Oh, thank you, and thanks for having me.
Beautiful souls, thank you again for journeying with me. If you have been blessed by this episode, it would mean the world to me if you would leave a review. Be sure to screenshot it, share it on your social media stories, and don't forget to tag me on Instagram or Facebook at Kylie Hein. Stay persistent in prayer, protect your peace, and as always, share the light of Christ with everyone around you.